Welcome back to the Thermo Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Jayton Miller, and today I have on the podcast one of the OGs, Billy Craig. So Billy Craig is the author of Consistent Eating. He is a UK-based independent health and nutrition researcher with a focus around the psychology of dieting and metabolism, among other related topics. In this episode, we talk about Billy's story. We talk about the no diet diet, why diet and exercise might not be what you need to slim up and feel good, why you really shouldn't count calories in most cases and be cutting calories whenever you're trying to heal your body, and why this is a common misconception in some cases. So there's a lot of golden nuggets in this episode, and I'm really excited for y'all to be able to listen to it. Every once in a while, the audio is a bit funky, but he is in the UK, so outside of that, it is relatively decent. So I hope y'all enjoy this episode. Let's get into it. How's it going today, guys? I am here with none other than Billy Craig. How you doing today, Billy?
Very well, thank you. You?
I'm doing very well. So for the listeners out there who might not know who you are, do you mind kind of telling them a little bit of your background and where you came from?
I started off as a cyclist, so riding for Team Great Britain. Got injured, ended up working for Rolls-Royce, which I think most people think is the car company, which was the aero engines. Wasn't massively interested in it, so I was looking for a way back into sport or some sort of health thing. And then fell into, like most people, personal training. And then my background in engineering never really made like dieting make much sense to me. I could never understand why people were trying to eat less. It just didn't, it was very mechanistic at the time, but it just didn't make any sense. So I probably should have gone straight to uni, but I ended up in a gym and pretty much got in arguments with everyone because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So yeah, that was kind of that was where the sort of "what would Billy say" tagline, because I was always doing everything different to anyone. And then if anyone got a problem, if any of the trainers got a problem that they didn't want to deal with, like someone who couldn't walk, like a 70-year-old man with a double hip replacement, or someone who'd got cancer, they'd all just get sent to me because they knew that I'd be quite interested in it. So
That's awesome. So what did you do after personal training?
I worked for a massive big gym, and they just starved me out of work, to be honest. They asked me to dumb down my programs, and I was more interested in teaching people. So I did decide to go and be a teacher, and then I realised that wasn't much better because you couldn't adapt the curriculum, and I wasn't happy teaching some of the things. So I then went to university and did a degree, like an undergraduate degree, in some really weird stuff, like neuroscience and biochemistry, and then some stuff that was completely off at a tangent. I wasn't aiming for any specialization. I think I was basically just looking for a way through uni without doing anything that had got a typical examination. So I was looking at things where I could argue and debate rather than having to sit, tests where there was structured answers. I was quite happy getting C's. A couple of times I got A's. I was quite proud of it. And then I think it was Michael Pessinger that said the better students were like C grade. I was aware that everyone was looking at outcomes, what was expected, and they were just doing anything to meet that. And I wasn't happy doing it. So I was quite happy getting in arguments with the dean, about all sorts of random stuff. So it was mainly just me dissenting, really. Then moved on to a master's degree in psychology. By that time I got a wife, so she kept me on track for that and came out with a distinction. So they're probably like, well, why did he get that? And then he suddenly towed the line, and it's probably because I got married. So I ended up switching to psychology because of this fascination with the brain and wanting to understand more. And then my next thing was going to be a PhD looking at caloric intake, and they'd got 20,000 participants for me to drag the data out from. And then right at the last minute, it turned out that it was a diet company called Slimming World, which is big in the UK. I think, is it in the US now?
I haven't heard of it personally.
Yeah, it's quite local to me, but they put £1 million into the local university. Guy who would be my supervisor then mailing me from what I can't remember what his name is, and then it was at slimmingworld.co.uk. And then he was started, well, we need you to change this hypotheses. We need you to start looking at ways to create adherence to the diet. So they wanted me to work on an app. And I wasn't really it looked like what I was going to do was probably going to make it look like their diet didn't work. So there was just a clash. So I walked away and started doing like a PhD by publication where I was just writing lots to then send it and edited by someone and do it by a more deceptive means.
Okay, interesting. So, one of the things that you are well known for is the 6,000 calorie diet. We were talking a bit before the podcast about it. Um, what is kind of your approach to nutrition on a general basis? And why do you kind of support the no diet approach?
Well, that's what we spoke about before. I think I'd probably maybe not classify it as a no diet because then people maybe think it's some massive refeed. When I did my 6,000 calories, I wasn't diagnosed with Asperger's at that point, but if I knew anything about psychology at that point, I would have probably guessed. I'm not sure that I'd get a diagnosis anymore because of certain things I've done. I'll still be obsessive about doing things, but not to that degree. But at that current point, if I was going to do something, I would do it well. So I was quite interested to do a little bit of a study, so more of an engineer's kind of idea of studying something. So I did a year at the gym, 4 hours a day, because I was injured from my sport. So I did 2 hours of cardio, 2 hours of weights. I checked out on my personal training course, which one's the best way to go. Do you do cardio first? They didn't know. So I'd set that all out, and I'd got to about 290 days of doing it every day, and I'd split it around, so it wasn't that I was overtraining certain things. So I was working hard, and I think I lost 4 pounds in a year. There was a point where one of the trainers in the gym offered me a free personal training session, and I couldn't work out what he was going to do because obviously an hour's personal training session. But he said he could do something. He underestimated my abilities as a former professional mountain biker, and it's not mountain biking as in loads of distances, and motorcyclist as well. So it's whilst I was tiny, I could lift more than most people because I'm used to throwing a motorbike around. So he couldn't do anything, and so I carried on. Even did Christmas Day because it was a hotel gym. So I think I did 395 days, and I got it all recorded. Lost 4 pounds. Then just happened to be in the change room, and there was a really in shape guy, and he was, "Oh, it's all about nutrition," and then he just walked out. So then I switched it on to it's all about nutrition. So I tracked and logged and recorded everything just out of interest for a period, just to see what I was doing, and kind of looked at everything's upside down. I'm having a big dinner and no breakfast and a little lunch, and so I started switching things around, and then just started playing with calories. Then struck upon a guy at Loughborough Uni, which is where my wife's just finished her PhD. He was also hated by everyone else, and he was looking at caloric intake and resting metabolic rate equations, so just standardized formula. And he got 3 teachers that were in the sort of book. I think it was the YMCA manual he was teaching from, and all 3 gave a different figure, and nobody else on the course. There were 30 people who were undergraduate students. None of them, they were all wanted to know which one the correct one was, and there was only me that could get it as an engineer. That they're just guesses, really. They're just all based on different formulas. So it got various ones, and they all went away having passed, but they didn't understand it. And that sort of threw me into does it really matter what the figure is? Will your body just adapt to what it is? So therefore, if you're in a gym starving yourself, you're making yourself more efficient, which is the exact opposite of what most people want. They want to burn fuel. They want to be inefficient. So that threw me down to playing with different figures, which eventually ended up being 6,000 calories a day, which was slightly insane.
Definitely. What did that look like on a daily basis as far as like what you were eating and your frequency and stuff like that?
I used to get up in the night to eat, so I've referred to it recently as being like a baby's diet, like an infant's diet. So if you've got small children, you know that they wake up in the night, maybe not if you bottle feed them because you can get a bit more in, but if they're breastfed, it's repetition, so they've not got the ability to store food. They've been used to being in the womb and just taking glucose whenever they want. So yeah, I've referred to it recently as the infant diet. And then if you look at the metabolic rate per unit mass, so per kilogram, that's the closest I've ever been in terms of metabolic rate to the metabolic rate in the womb. So probably pretty much that. But I was eating at about, I think it was 3 o'clock. So I get up and have a massive bowl of bran flakes. And I think from memory, I've not got all the date. I did record it all, but I think it's probably up in the loft somewhere. I think it was something like half a box of bran flakes, and then then I'd get up, before I went to work, and I'd have another breakfast, and then I couldn't go longer than I struggled to have a client for an hour. And I've still got one of those clients now and again, and she would confirm that 45 minutes I was thinking about eating. Because I still used to ride my bike and do shows for various people in like nightclubs, the bag of food that I would take with me just to go from say 9 o'clock till 1 in the morning was insane. I couldn't go anywhere without food. So that's not going to work for most people, because if you've got to sit in an office in the boardroom, you can't be you can't have a drip of food next to you. It was too far, but as an experiment, it was good. Nobody believed it. Everyone thought I'd got an eating disorder and was starving myself. My mum, kept making comments. Oh, come on, you need to start eating. And I don't think it would work that quick for most people, because I've got no background in real dieting. I'd put weight on just through drinking. I'd never drank in my life, and when I got injured, I kind of thought, well, why not? I've not been drinking because I wanted to be world champion, so I haven't got a reason anymore. So I kind of got into that. So I just got fatter through, I don't know, maybe inactivity and depression, and just turned into drink. And then for most people, if you've got I don't know, if you're in your 40s and you've got a history of dieting, it's not your metabolism is going to repair that quick. It's going to be a longer term project. So I think the staged one, and I wouldn't want anyone to get up to 6,000 calories, because it just ruins your life. It's like the opposite. Well, it's still a disordered eating if you can't survive without food. And I think that's why metabolism has to decrease. So you're in the womb, pure glucose, and then you're born, and you cry and you get fed. And I think there's a problem around 4. So around 4, we typically go to school, and then you can't get fed whenever you want anymore. And maybe around 4 as well. If you start crying and you're hungry, you get told to stop being naughty. Whereas when you're younger, you either get taken to the toilet, get your nappy changed, get put to bed, or get fed. It's like an ideal world. Once you get that little bit older and get into school age, it becomes a behavioural problem. As you've got to get more physically active, you've got to slow down the metabolic rate a little bit. Make sure there's protein to grow muscles, and fat to have a little bit of a buffer. So the growth in the brain dips a little bit. So the cognitive ability. So there is some research that I've been doing for a new book, that sort of like 4 or 5 is like your peak of intelligence. Now, you obviously do learn more things, but for the size and for what you know, and that's like where you peak, and then you actually never really get any cleverer than that after that. So,
Wow.
and if you look at 4 and 5-year-olds, they'll ask questions and they'll do stuff, and then by the time teenagers, they'll just what just tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it. So 4 or 5-year-old kids are intuitive. They know they're hungry. They know what they want. They'll ask questions. They want to know the answer to why. Why does that happen? Why does that happen? A little bit older, and it's just do whatever they have to.
Wow, that's interesting. One of the things that I've heard before is that before the age of 2, one of the reasons that people can't remember that part of at the beginning stages of their life is because their metabolic rate is so high that they're almost in a psychedelic like trance for their first 2 years of life.
Mm.
Just because the energy flow through the system is at such a high rate that their experience is, it's not really memorable, because they
Mm.
get kind of pulled back down after those first 2 years.
I think that's definitely potential, because if you look at dopamine and say dopamine, if you've got like a baseline dopamine and then like a peak dopamine, if you look at that in children, that's why they've got no, they're literally. I look at that and like my son, he's 5 now, and because of the way we feed him and just I like just go for it, just eat. He's still so passionate about something for like 20 seconds, then he's like another thing over there, and then as things change and diet change and serotonin comes up, that you narrow down, you become a little bit more fixated on stuff, which is good because think that thing more clearly, but you miss out on all the things before, and then you go too far and you become OCD and just like this is I'm fat, and this is all I can think of. And you're like, well, if you was a kid, you'd see the bigger picture, and you're not fat. And so yeah, I would say that's definitely plausible. Not something I particularly probably given me another chapter. I'm on 75 chapters already, so it's probably
Okay.
that'll be something I'm going to add another one. I keep saying I finished, and I keep adding more chapters to the biggest book in the world.
You should definitely send me a link to where I can pre-order the book after the podcast. I'm super interested in that.
Oh, that just puts. I did that with my first book. I put a pre-order thing on there, and then it just put. I'd never even thought about the stresses of publishing it, and it changed so much from the start. It was just literally going to be a diet book to start about why you shouldn't diet, and then it ended up being about Alzheimer's and about how the brain sort of tries to protect itself. So that the fat is just an energy buffer. So I very much view it, and still do now, which is useful for people, that if you're overweight, your body is just protecting you. It's protecting you for you're showing it in. So if you want to show it that things are safer over a progressive period of time, do things safely. Dumping 6,000 calories in when you've been on 1,500 isn't safe. That just says our organs, my pancreas isn't big enough to deal with that. We've not had this for 20 years. What's going on? So that's more stress. So if you do things progressively, understand where you are, build a scientific experiment, an old style scientific experiment, not this new modern, this is what we want, what are we going to do? So if you sit there, observe, and hopefully measure. So you could do it with a calorie formula. So you could say, this is where I am, this is how big I am, and I'm not happy with that. This is what that formula gives me. This is where I want to be. I want to be this weight. That's the difference between them. That's a massive gap. I'm not going to do that because that would be a massive jump. I'm going to stage it down. And that's why I initially got metabolic carts to use. And before I even knew they existed, I just used that formula and said, well, he's told me this formula. Common theory says that I should have a deficit. I'm not going to. I'm going to have 200 calories extra. So it's not much. It's nothing. It's negligible, really. And then after a period of time, I'll take it up another 200. So I just kept doing that and that. And then when I got metabolic carts, I'd get the reading off that, and I said, right, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to take it up by 200. I'll test again in a month. Go up and go up and go up. So I think if people start with an objective measure of where they are, so they actually do old school science and observe nature, then form the hypotheses, and it could still be I'm going to eat less, move more, or it could be the opposite way around. But if you can't say what you're going to do, you can't measure it at the end. You can't objectively know whether you're going anywhere. So
Yeah. Now, whenever you're doing an approach like this, do you take into consideration nutrient density, or like to what degree do you think that matters?
I did think it mattered quite a lot, but I've also seen a lot of people eating a lot of junk food. I think it matters where you are, and I think, like we were saying before, I think for most people, if they start something and they understand where they are, and they've not just jumped onto some clean eating, fasting protocol, if they understand where they are and they start progressively trying to improve it back, by the time they've got there, their energy's increased, their ability to absorb nutrients has increased, their gastrointestinal tract is better, so they don't really have to worry about getting particular things. Things just start improving. So for, I don't know, 90% of people that do the thing they want to when they come to me, we end up where everything's all right. We've done it progressively. I think one of the problems in most worlds and in the Ray Peat world is that people suddenly jump in, find out there's this orange juice and milk diet, dump it in, and then can't absorb it. They can't do anything with it because the gastrointestinal tract is shrunken a little bit through starvation. The pancreas isn't good, so they can't use the sugar that well. They can't get things to the brain, so they end up with brain fog. It's just rushed. So if people, for most of the people I work with, when they do it slower, over even years, some people, they say, right now, I understand I've dug a massive hole. I'm going to progressively get myself out of it. They don't really have to worry about it. In some of my athletes, yeah, we'll look at all sorts of things, or some of the athletes I did have, and the one that I'm working with now, we're not at that stage yet, but because we're looking at performance for him, then yeah, we will be manipulating things and trying to change things around. So at the moment, we're just looking at baseline and getting that ready. But when he's in the car racing, then we'll be manipulating all sorts of things to try and improve it and get things better. But I think for your average person on the street, just increasing energy generation, as Ray would say, is enough to get them to where they are. There are people with specific things where we can look and say you need some more of this, and then it's like when you use in America, chronometer is
Hmm.
great. It's getting a good. It's horrible and clunky to use, and it's painful. It's even worse than tracking calories normally. But as an occasional, every 2 months, I'm going to drop into this and see where I am. Do any of those deficiencies link with what I am? Do I need to supplement them? Can I adjust things around? Is it because my gastrointestinal tract's not great? Are there reasons for it? So another good measure. I'm not keen on just dumping things in unknown. And the same with carbohydrates. I'm more interested in. I had a lady come to see me who was diabetic, and everything looked good, and she was saying she's good, so she drove to see me, which I think it was like 50 miles, which is nothing to American people, but that's quite a big journey for someone in Britain sometimes to come and see someone like me. And 50% of her intake was fat, and it had just slipped. She'd done stuff before. I'd met her before, and she was saying, "No, I'm still doing the same." And the butter had just slipped up, which is great. There's nothing wrong with it, but she'd not been diabetic for several years, and just over time, she progressively just the macronutrients had just changed, and she was suddenly eating quite a high fat diet. Swatched it around again just by using chronometer. I think I had to fill it in for her because she was a certain age and was sort of afraid of the technology. So that literal session, we just filled in a day of her diet. She was eating a lot of fat. She couldn't at work, so she was missing that meal. Changed it around. The next time she saw the diabetic nurse, everything was fine. So
Wow. Now, with this progressive approach, do you usually like how fast do you usually progress? Is that independent to the person?
yeah, that's where sort of psychology would come in for me. I try and get an idea of, which is a bit woo, of where they are, and everyone will come in saying, "No, this is really what I want to do." I've had someone who comes back every year at the same sort of point, and I'm like, "There's got to be something that's kicking this in their life." So I try and, I don't know. I've always sold myself as I'm not bothered if someone came and told me they're a murderer and they wanted to sort the diet out. I'm literally not bothered as long as you've not murdered any of my family. So people do tend to tell me some weird stuff. But I've into the psychology, for that reason, not to sort of counsel people, but I try and get an understanding of where they are. And most people tend to tell me the truth, or they're telling me some pretty outlandish stuff. And then from that, I will let them decide, and I will sort of try and educate them and say, like, are you sure? There's people who come in and say, right, well, I want to have one session with you. I'm not the best business person. I want to have one session with you, and then I'll go alone. I'm like, I'd rather I'll have one session with you, and can I have it in 5 minutes? And when you're on your way to your office, can you just call me and I'll just run some ideas past, and it'll be drip feeding in, and because they just go off on their own. And partly because they get back into their old world with their old friends. I suppose it's like packing up smoking. If you keep going to the pub and hanging around with the smokers, they're going to drag you back down. So in that sort of world, you get people back doing stuff. So it's always staged, because I don't think anyone's going to come to me having just dieted for a couple of months. I think most people are right. They're going to do all the other options before they find out about me. I'm not the best advertiser. Um, Even through lockdown, like, I should do this and I should do that. I just sit here writing controversial things and not even posting it, because I've just literally built think I've got 350,000 words in a book that's going, and really I could have been posting that on the internet and getting customers, and I've just been sitting typing away earning no money. Obsessively, no one sees it, and then sitting there thinking no one's even going to understand any of this. Sent it out to some people to proofread, and it's not even, I don't even know if it's finished. Don't even know what some of it says because it's that long ago that I started writing it. By the time people come to see me, they've got to have some sort of history of long-term disordered eating. So, I just think, I haven't admitted that I rushed into it because I'm desperate for change. But I suffered. I always encourage people to just be in contact with someone. It doesn't have to be me, it could be you, it could be anyone, but get some sort of support network because it's a different viewpoint, really. It's, the whole world's talking about starvation, and not just, they're talking about longevity and fasting being good, and that guy who lived in the biosphere. I wrote about him at one point where he starved himself, and he was still adamant at his death. His arms were in slings to continue his work because his brain was suffering that bad. He was still adamant that he would have lived to 120. It was living in the biosphere that killed him, the nitric oxide or whatever. It was nothing to do with starving himself. So the world's full of theories about eating less and doing all sorts of dietary things. So I think it's a strange world, and I think people are better doing things slowly, admitting that it's taken them 30 years to get that environmental problem, that the fat they've got on them is a buffer. So if you lose it quickly, that just signals more stress. If you go and have have it all chopped off, that's just going to send a message to your brain saying that energy buffer that we've created today for 20 years because the environment's not great, it's just been taken. So slow things down even more. In some people I've measured, they've got a very low metabolic rate per unit mass, but they're not fat, they're not overweight. They tend to be the ones in my research that tend to have the sort of brain degeneration. We've got like family histories of Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. And that's one of the things that happens in dementia. So people might be plump or overweight, which we know is protective in old age. So it's good to be have a little bit of fat or some fat. And then prior to Alzheimer's being diagnosed, they seem to lose weight, and that happens in a lot of cachexia and muscle loss. So almost when I see someone who's overweight, it's almost as though your body is protecting you. It's protecting your brain. It's creating this energy buffer. Yes, it's fine to lose the weight. We all want to do it because we all want to look at like the pictures we see in magazines or Instagram, but realize that it's an energy buffer. It's an emergency store. Do it properly. Take your time. The longer the better. And most people have messed up diets and on and off and on and off. So generally people are there saying, well, this is the one I want to do properly, and I'm past it. And everyone's always saying, oh, I dieted at 20. If I could look like I did at 20 now, I'd be great. And then it's like, well, you're 50 now. You'll probably be saying this when you're 70. I wish I could look like I was when I was 50. So it's a fine line between science, physiology and psychology, really, of calming someone down a lot of the time. They're mad to come do 6,000 calories, and no, you don't know where you are. You'll hate me. You'll go on the internet and slate me. There was some guy who did it. I think he tried to get me on his radio show, and luckily I said no because he was a vegan. Can't remember what his name was now, but literally, oh, you come on my show, and I was just nervous about it for some reason. It was on YouTube, I think. And then he'd done a water fast, I think 4 weeks. And then the next thing he'd done was 6,000 calories because he'd read it on the internet of me, and he wanted to debate that he'd put weight on. And I'm like, well, you're going to. It's not a fair scientific trial, is it? And it's not comparing what I did for a year with data and everything. And I've not done a water fast. So it's, you've not been able to repeat the results. You did it for a week, and you just cheated it beforehand. So, there's some bizarre ideas out there. So, but people come in, I've read this thing, this seems like me. And I did some stuff with Matt Stone before, and he did this eat for heat. And it's fine, it's right. But if it's going to cause that panic, then people are going to jump back off and go straight back to their old habits, aren't they? So
definitely. Now, do you notice that whenever you're taking an approach like this and you begin refeeding, is there a significant difference between males and females whenever you're working with them?
Um, Psychologically, yeah, some of the males are terrible. Um, shouldn't say that generic. Some of the males that have visited me in the past are terrible. So I've had family members, and so yeah, some of them, I don't know. But now equally, I've had some males that are great, and like I don't understand it, but I want to, and I need to see you more. But yeah, there's been some women that have had very low metabolic rates, like history of severe eating disorder, and I have lied to a few because I'm literally not telling you that number. So I've done it, whereas I said I refed mine up by eating slightly higher, I've done that with them. Just like, oh yeah, it's this figure. And but I've had men, businessmen, really intelligent people who've said, this is your metabolic rate, here's all the data. No, no, it's not. I'm not eating that much. One must have been about 6'4", like you're a big guy, you know. And no, 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 I'm going to eat 2,000 because that's what there's a doctor in the UK, Dr. Michael Mosley says. So I don't know. I think it depends on the person. I suppose sometimes if people have been sent by their partner to sort themselves out and do it properly, they're not always that willing to do it. So I think by the time most people come to me, they've they've read something about a repeat and they've just found me. Or occasionally you get people who've read about metabolic carts, so they're obviously searching for it and they find that I've got one, and then they find that I'm going to do it completely different to everyone else. So I'm not going to give them a massive calorie deficit. Um, yeah, I think the people I meet have already got an idea what I'm going to say. So most people are quite ready to do something. Um, and generally, if they're not, then I don't work with them. Particularly now, I haven't got the time. I'm far more interested in writing bits for a book that I've not published yet. So yeah, I think I've always had that. Like I said, I'm not the best business person in the world. I'm not that driven to do it. I've got someone trying to make me a bit more passionate about it, so that I can live and survive and eat, and try and set some of them online so that you can help more people. I always had that goal of, I used Patreon, and it was always a goal to get to like where I could just survive on everyone paying me $1, and I'd got a lot of people, and I could just do whatever and speak to anyone whenever they needed it, and everyone only paid $1. I don't know, I suppose like I wanted to be some sort of like healthcare socialist. But in reality, if people have got this far, then I think they're willing to do something. I think particularly in the UK, there's just no help anywhere for anyone. So I've got someone whose family member is theoretically suffering with anemia. And I managed to get the basic thyroid test that they've got, and everything looks way off. And it's the first thing they've ever heard about it. So they're not in a position to pay me. I haven't really got the time, and I'm sitting back looking at it and thinking that this is a severe problem because they have got no awareness that there is anything other than our sort of health service, and that's the way to do it. They don't know that they're of a specific age, so they've got no awareness of anything, or any discussion on the internet about thyroid health. They've got they've got no awareness of anything. So they're just literally sat there doing that. So typically, if you found someone like myself or you on the internet, if you listen to your podcast, you're aware that things aren't quite right and you want to do something. So it's in both men and women normally. If they've made it here by normal means, it's generally slowing them down and saying, no, back off that, stop gulping down thyroid and get off all those vitamins. Let's slow it down and see where you are, and then choose what strategy you're going to do, measure it. If there's a lot of people throwing a lot of things in, and like, well, how do you know what's working and how do you know what's not working? So let's back off, do it one at a time, make it. Well, basically teach people to be a scientist and do it on their own. And then I think if you do that, and if you can actually measure something and you're testing it, then you're a bit more keen to stick with it because, well, let's see what the outcome is and then measure it and then change it and do it again and change things, put it up, and it becomes a bit more exciting for people.
Definitely. Um, what do you think are some of the most significant psychological tools that you've given people that are struggling to make that first step? So they're struggling with the amount of calories that they're eating. They don't want to go above and beyond because they're afraid of the physical repercussions from, gaining fat or this image that they have in their head. What are some of the things that you give them to overcome those things?
Just science, to be honest, just tests. I We've got a massive problem in the moment in the UK with behaviourists, and a lot of psychologists. I'm not actually a psychologist because I didn't do a doctorate in it, but um, people like myself who are graduate psychologists and actual psychologists, a lot of high ones have wrote to the government and said, no, behaviourists shouldn't be handling a pandemic. So we've done behavioural things. Every year I take out my subscription to be a member of the British Psychological Society. A year I think they're going to strike me off and say you're not coming in, because I had an interview for a psychology doctorate to be a doctor of psychology, and then the interview was, what was my favourite bit of psychology, and I described psychology from years ago, where physics was involved and chemistry was involved. It was more like biopsychology, and they said, what don't you like? And I said, behaviourism. And this 5-year doctorate would basically have been behaviourism, like how to turn me around. So I prefer to not use psychology. My only use of psychology is to try and understand where that person is now and the impact it's having on their mental health, and the fear, and the lack of glucose in the brain that's driving them towards that fear. So they're literally acting through fear. So I try to put evidence in the way, and then I'll debate them. So I worked with someone just before Christmas, I think it was, and I gave her all the answers to the tests we'd done and said, these are the things that are cropping up. What do you think they mean? So that person wrote back and I said, well, no, I think that means that. Because if I had gone in and said, well, this is all this, and then repeat says this, and this the thing said that, she'd have just nodded her head and said, oh yeah, great. So I literally just lay it out, like, you tell me what you think this means, and then we'll debate it, and I'll probably win. But you give me hell, you fight for what you do, and I'll disprove everything. And then at the end of it, if you win, I'll bow down, and then you can teach me some stuff. But you just debate it with me and question me and challenge me. I'll fight it with everything I've got, and then at the end of it, you tell me what you think you should do. So at the end of it, we'd had this hour-long debate, and then she was like, "Oh, I need to get rid of that and do that." So she understood it. So then she might have a little bit of a wobble because, well, hang on a minute, I've done 20 years of this, but then she comes back and it's easier to then point it in directions. I suppose it is behaviorism, but it's more that let's have an argument about it.
Mm,
I'm going to win because it's what I do. You don't do it, but we need to know what you know, and then and that's what you go to see someone sometimes, and it's, I read this, it's great, and I'm just going to nod my head every time you say no because I know you're good, and so it's a lot better to say, right, this is where this thing's cropping up to do with essential fatty acids. What do you think it means? So they come back, well, I need more essential fatty acids because there's, well, actually, it's saying the other thing round, and it's also suggesting to me, given your lactate level and your metabolic rate, and the fact that we know you've got an eating disorder, that you're actually burning fat as a fuel. So that's not great, and so it gives a good basis for a good argument, really, which I quite like.
definitely. Uh, what do you think are some of the most common things that people come to you with as far as like their confusion?
Um, Obesity is the main one. People seem to think obesity. In the UK, we've got this thing that there's an obesity epidemic in children. Um, and I literally stood in the playground at my child's school, and I can't remember what they said the figures were. I was like, where are they? And they were like, oh, but yeah, well, they are here. And like, where? The playground. There's some kids that are plump. And that could be the stress of academia pushing the brain, and they're not being fed. Like the kids at our school don't get an afternoon snack anymore, apart from my daughter, because I argued. So she's allowed one. So there's various things, but they come in with this idea that obesity exists and that it's going to kill you. So then you can kill that argument by saying, well, here they said the papers in this country paint it as, it's a burden on society, it's a burden on the NHS, it's a burden on this. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute, you said they die earlier. How are they a burden on the economy? If you say they're eating more food and they die earlier, so why are they a burden on the NHS? And I did a graph with the actual figures of obesity's cost on primary care. And then when you put it in with like drunks on a Friday night, you couldn't even see the obesity. And I'm like, well, why are you not picking on them? So that's the biggest thing. They come in with this idea that they are obese, and then my idea is that they're not. They're just creating this safety energy buffer. Therefore, quite often send them away to read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. I've had quite a few clients. It's like, you can't book in with me. Go and read his book because he's great. Then come back and then see if your perspectives change. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I get that. So it's kind of like whatever they come in with, and they always think they're fat and they need to lose weight, and it's like a battle. Like, I know you're saying you eat more, but I need to know that. So it's kind of challenging what theirs are, which again I suppose is psychology, and then getting them to go away and do some work, which is probably because I'm lazy. And then they come back with a slightly changed perspective, and yeah, I get where you're coming from now. So about getting people to do their own work, which is one of the things that comes out in Ray's thing. That people send him an email, and like, he's not really answered it. I'm like, because he wants you to go and find the answer out. He's pointed you in the right direction, and he's give you some things to kick your brain into gear. Get a little bit of sugar, and it might work. So it's I don't think there's any one, because I sort of spread myself a bit thin. I've had cancer patients, and I get calls of people saying, "Do you do endometriosis?" I'm like, well, it's not what I sit here doing, but you give me the problem, and I'll do it. So I'm quite happy to give my clients away when they get somewhere, because a lot of my clients end up working, or did do. There's quite a lot of people I've worked with. I'd quite happily send someone to do their baseline work, and then I'd rather just have someone new with something challenging that I've not worked with, because it makes me go and read. Um, there's diseases and things I've had, and like, I've got no idea what this is, and they're paid. They're like, I paid you because I think you can figure this out. And I'll be back with you in a couple of hours, and then right, go and read this, do that, and then we'll both learn together. So it's. But obesity is the big one, that people come in with this idea that they are obese and they are a burden on society, and they're not as good as somebody else. So that's the biggest one to dispatch normally.
So if you're trying to help someone who has or who is or under the impression that they are obese, um, and they want to lose weight, what are some of the tactics that you do in order to allow that to happen? Um,
Really depends on the individual, but there was a good example of a guy. I can't remember what weight he was, but fairly large by normal means. His sister was a dealer in diet shakes. So she was quite hard onto him to become a customer. Um, and then we tested his metabolic rate per unit mass, and it was something like 11 calories per kilogram. So it's just sat with him and said, you literally can't afford to become more efficient. That. So mine's at 26. There was some study done on people who live over 100, and they concluded that they got low metabolic rates because they were tiny. And I think Matt Stone's done a sort of like an advert for Matt Stone, isn't it? There's that he's done some work on the fact that small people live longer. So these people had got what looked like a low metabolic rate. I can't remember the actual figures, but when you actually sort of got it by their average weight, it worked out the metabolic rate was 26 calories per kilogram. So they got a high metabolic rate when you looked at it just per kilogram. If you looked at it, so you can't. My mate is like 130 kilograms, like big guy. You can't compare him against that and say, oh, yeah, he's got a high metabolic rate, they've got a low metabolic rate. So my mate that I measured, who's a big rugby player, hell of a guy. He looks like he's, I don't know, it's 3,000. He ends up having 3,300 calories. And everyone's like, oh, he's got a high metabolic rate. When you actually divide it by that and work out his unit mass, he's fairly efficient. Whereas the little guys, they're not eating a massive amount of calories because they're tiny and they're 100 years old, but they're getting through some energy at a rapid rate. Kids, it's like in the womb, it's like 100 calories per kilogram. It's accepted that the standard norm for an adult is 25, and you never see those. I don't know who worked that out. I don't know where they worked it out from, whether it was elite athletes or something, but it takes me a lot of effort to keep mine at 26. And if I start working hard, working long hours, doing things for people abroad, and then both ends of the day, then that gets knocked on the head quite quick and it drops. My daughter was at 52 last time I tested her when she was 6. Just not got around to testing them recently, but you're getting more efficient. But it's like you're born, it's 100, you're in the womb, it's 100, and it's down to 75, then 50, then all of a sudden it's like 18, and it's like 25, all the way through to you die 25, and like you never see that. And and obviously people who come to see me aren't in a great state, but I've tested people in uni, I've tested athletes. You don't see 25 very often, mainly just me, and that's a lot of effort to be there. And I'm not suggesting you need to be 25. You don't have to be 26. Not everyone wants to live to 100. It's not guaranteed that you live to 100 if you're 26. You could get run over by a bus or anything. But if you're heading towards the higher end of that, that metabolic rate per unit mass, things start working better. You don't want to be. You've got to be efficient because you've got to have enough energy for muscles and movement, and the brain's got to make sure it can survive. So I do believe you have to get some level of efficiency. But if it keeps dropping like a stone, then things don't seem to get very nice, and life seems to get shorter. And particularly, my thinking was that if I can have a high metabolic rate, I may not live to be 100. If you see how I crash motorcycles in competitions, I probably won't do. But I would like to be pleasant and not riddled with disease, dementia, and basically just surviving. So that would always be my goal. Not that there's any longevity guaranteed, just that end of life can be pleasant and just off you pop and that's it. So
Definitely, I completely agree. Well, you are filled with information, and I know you could probably sit here and talk to us for hours on end about probably just about anything. But where can people find your work and all the stuff that you're up to currently?
Not been updating billycraig.co.uk for quite a while, mainly due to time. Tried to go onto Patreon. So there's a link on my website to Patreon because the goal was to just get to the point where it could just be like $1 each and everyone could just read stuff. So I do tend to get to update that. 4 books due. So one on coronavirus, one on the psychology of pandemics, one on CO2, and then one that's currently the big one, which is 350,000 words and 75 chapters, which no one's ever going to read. I'll probably give an award if anyone reads it. That's currently a working title of Controlling Intuitive Appetite, which happens to be CIA as well, so it'll probably get banned on eBay, on Amazon. That's due. So there was some debate about whether we should just release it as chapters, which may happen just due to time and stuff like that. But sections of that keep getting put on Patreon. Myself and Sarah Kennard do the podcast. So all the coronavirus things we've tried to do for free, just to make it accessible for people. So Facebook tend to get into debates because I think it's good practice for if I ever have to do a Viva to defend things, and I enjoy defending it. Probably not in real life because I might get punched, but on the internet it's all good. So yeah, and then if anyone's got any questions, then I try to get back. I'm a bit busy now because I've got this new project on that someone's taking me on to. But where I can, I don't know, I've always had this desire that if people can be helped, they should be. I try to get back to all the questions I can. If someone's polite and got a good question, then I tend to jump on it because it spikes my inquisitivity.
Definitely. Well, Billy, I really appreciate your time. For all those you listening, make sure to go check out his website. He has a really good Instagram and Facebook page as well, so make sure to check those out. And we'll talk again soon. Have a good one.
Yeah. See you later.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment down below if you want us to cover a different topic.